Welcome to the Tesla Power Podcast. This is where we are building the Tesla energy community, covering solar panels, solar roof, and power wall for your home. I'm Aaron Brady, and today, let's talk about unexpected problems with net metering. Let's talk about Australia's residential and grid-scale batteries, and let's ask the question, can we redirect the net metering incentive to battery manufacturing instead? And there's more. Let's do it. So as per usual, we'll kick off the pod with community input. You can participate in a ton of ways. You can call 203-816-5150. You can leave a comment below. You can link your YouTube videos, or you can email teslapowerpodcast@gmail.com. And of course, for the bold and ambitious, you can record an unlisted video question in the YouTube app. Send me a link. I'll put your video question in the show. First up, we have Dwight Adams. He's got another question. And this is a very good one. I wanted to make sure I pointed out. Let me bring it full screen for you. I just want to make sure it's highlighted. This is so good, so good. He asks, quote, how am I taking advantage of other customers if I'm paying the same rates, end quote. Well, let's get into a little nuance, shall we? Has anyone here run into the acronym LCOE? This stands for the levelized cost of electricity, and it's a ratio used to estimate the cost of electricity over time, taking several factors into account. In the numerator, we've got capital costs to build the power plant, operating costs to run and maintain that power plant over its lifespan, and the lifespan itself of that power plant. In the denominator, and this is the big one, we have utilization factor of the power plant. Now, you might have heard of Tony Seba and ReThinkX. They have been doing some really great videos that walk through this, and I'd like to play a clip from their video, The Great Stranding. This clip's about 4 minutes, a little long, but it is definitely worth it. Let's take a listen.
LCOE averages the total costs that a new power plant will incur during its financial lifetime, divided by the total amount of electricity that the plant will generate and sell during that same period. This gives a cost per unit of energy, usually dollars per megawatt hour or per kilowatt hour, that regulators, investors, and other decision makers can use to compare different technology options.
As you might imagine, the calculation is very sensitive to the amount of electricity you assume that the plant can generate and sell. If a plant produces and sells less electricity, then the cost per unit of electricity will be higher, especially because a large portion of the plant's costs are fixed, meaning that they stay the same regardless of plant output. No matter how much power plants produce, they have to pay for operating and maintenance costs and repayment of their initial capital investment, their mortgage.
In standard LCOE calculations, the total amount of electricity is determined by the power plant's capacity factor, or utilization rate. Imagine you own a commercial vehicle, say a taxi before Uber. If a taxi had the potential to drive 100,000 miles per year, then driving at 100,000 miles in the first year gives a capacity factor, or utilization rate, of 100% for that year. If it only drives 50,000 miles, then it would have a capacity factor of 50% for its first year. And if it only drives 10,000 miles, then it would have a capacity factor of 10% for that year. The less the taxi's capacity is utilized, the more each mile it drives costs. Similarly, if a 1 megawatt coal power plant ran at full capacity for every single hour of its first year, then it would sell 8,760 megawatt hours of electricity and have a capacity factor of 100% for that year. If the same plant only managed to sell half that much electricity, then its capacity factor would be 50%, and so on. The less the plant's capacity is utilized, the more each megawatt hour of electricity would cost.
Now remember, we're not just talking about owning and operating a power plant for 1 year. the financial lifetime of these assets is decades, 20, 30, 40 years. So to calculate LCOE, we have to add up all the electricity generated and sold over that entire lifetime. And again, the calculation is very sensitive to the capacity factor, because that is what determines the quantity of electricity produced. And here we come to the crucial issue. Mainstream LCOE analyses assume that capacity factor, and thus electricity generation and sales, will start at an unrealistically high rate and then remain constant year after year after year for a power plant's entire 20, 30, 40 year long lifetime.
But these are fundamental errors. First, capacity factor will not start at a higher rate than market reality. And second, capacity factor will not remain constant. It would be like telling investors and city planners that taxis were going to have a high and constant capacity factor for decades to come, even as new ride-hailing technologies like Uber and Lyft are disrupting that market.
Power plant capacity factor will at best match the market in its first year. And then it will decline as conventional power plants are outcompeted and disrupted by newer technologies.
And that disruptor? I mean, that's you. That's your residential solar and battery system outcompeting your utilities' established coal, gas, nuclear, or hydro power plants. That even includes your utilities' solar and battery facilities. If you have net metering, it's even worse. Instead of just outcompeting power plants, which may include grid-scale solar and battery, don't forget, the utility is forced to pay retail for your capacity rather than wholesale to the renewable grid-scale provider. So, rather than competing in the market, the government's picking the it's picking the residential sector as the winner in this transaction by pegging the cost of residential capacity at the retail rate. And I don't know what happens when the utility has to pay higher prices for electricity generation. Everyone's electricity rates go up. That includes your rate, but you don't care. You're using so much less electricity from the grid that the rise in utility rates still results in a lower monthly bill. And, ironically, as electricity rates go up, the amount you're saving, along with the amount you're getting paid for the extra electricity you generate, is making your investment even more valuable. So, here's the summary of what's happening on the utility side of this story. Let's listen.
Conventional power plants will see their capacity factor drop even more dramatically as each megawatt hour of electricity they produce becomes more difficult to sell than the last, as they face increased competition from solar, wind, and batteries. As in other disruptions throughout history, this naturally creates a feedback loop, where shrinking demand reduces revenues, which forces incumbents to raise their prices, causing demand to shrink still further, again reducing revenues, forcing them to raise their prices even more, on and on in a death spiral.
So this is the value trap that utilities and its customers who can't install solar and storage for themselves are all stuck in. It's this value trap that has the utilities and advocacy groups up in arms. I wouldn't say they're wrong exactly. I'd just say that their argument requires residential solar customers like you and me and solar industry workers to really get into the weeds to understand the nuance of the argument. So, let's be real, right? It's usually too much to ask, especially when things start to get heated or political. It's definitely too much when people's jobs are at stake. What is clear, though? This can't continue. It's not sustainable. Net metering it is a helpful incentive, to start this transition, but we're getting to a point where the incentives need to be wound down, or as I argue, redirected. If we're directing the incentive to battery manufacturing, we'll be creating jobs, we'll be lowering the cost of battery storage, and we'll be accelerating the transition to renewable energy as a whole. I mean, I don't know. Am I wrong here? Let me know in the comments below. All right, next up, we have Alan Otten, he dropped me an email outlining his Tesla solar experience. Let's read it. Regarding your recent comments about the delay you and others are experiencing getting PTO, I had my 4.08 kilowatt solar panels installed this past July. I believe that the city inspection and SCE, that's Southern California Edison, PTO took less than a week. My system cost $6,000 net, and my payback should be about 5 years. My system generates more than enough electricity to cover all of my electric usage, including AC. I only pay about $10 per month for non-bypassable charges. My experience with Tesla was very good. It took about 3 months to get from application to installation, and the only downside was that it was impossible to get my Tesla rep to give me a call. Enjoy your podcasts. End quote. I mean, less than a week for PTO sounds frankly impossible. You know, the team there and the local utility really did a great job for you, and honestly, it's amazing to hear. I also love hearing that the overall experience was good. Not getting a call back from Tesla, I mean, that's par for course. It does make me think, though, how long ago maybe your installation was. Because if it was in the past 12 months, I would have hoped that your experience was a little better on the communication front. They certainly seem to have stepped up their game in the last 6 months for sure. Kevin, Frosty GT, even I've been, a testament to that. But both, Kevin and Frosty GT, they put in tons of effort into the communication part. But their efforts have been reciprocated. They haven't just fallen on deaf ears. And I'd say their experiences have been pretty good. And, I hope Tesla is able to keep this up. We need better communication from them, overall. That is for sure. Thank you, Dwight Adams, Alan Oddens, for your input. Let's hear from the rest of you, too. Send your YouTube links. Send your comments below. Call 203-816-5150. Email teslapowerpodcast@gmail.com. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll get into the news. So Tech Australia reports on a bill to help residents get some home battery storage. Quote, like many Australians, I love renewable energy. I love EVs. I love solar panels we installed on our home in February 2020. Now that more than a quarter of Aussie homes have solar, the next frontier is energy storage. Amen, brother. With Australia's energy grid increasingly leveraging utility scale storage to replace aging coal-fired power plants or avoid new gas peaking. I feel like I'm missing something here. The challenge is solving the low adoption of home battery storage, which currently sits at less than 1%. Independent member for Indy, Helen Haynes, is located just down the road in Wangaratta. Yeah. And earlier this week proposed a new bill to Parliament, the Cheaper Home Battery Bill 2022, end quote. This is on brand for me and for this episode for sure. This includes a $3,000 rebate to the installer that should bring down the cost to consumers. Ultimately, I gotta say, I am not a fan of this sort of incentive, but I really am happy to see anything that helps, residents add to overall storage capacity. The problem I see with this approach is that prices are high because there's not enough supply. This type of incentive is really something that'll stimulate demand from consumers, but I don't think that's the problem. What I'd prefer to see are battery incentives for manufacturing. This can both increase supply so prices can come down more organically, and prices can come down for consumers on a market basis. But the bigger thing, it's going to create jobs. Overall, I can support this. I can appreciate the end goal here. And I just wanted to point it out that that's where Australia is. And that's where the United States is going to be in not too long. We're moving past where solar adoption needs to be incentivized. And we need to get to the point where battery manufacturing is incentivized, stimulated, and growing so that we can then adapt battery storage to help stabilize the grid, the grill. All right, more news from Oz. Let's bring this up. This is pointing out that gas peaker plants are dumb. Let's read it. Full screen quote. In a submission to the Australian Energy Operators Draft 2022 Integrated System Plan, Tesla describes batteries as the new clean peaker, outlining their superior flexibility, their multiple grid service options, and their ability to deliver longer duration storage. Tesla is dismayed by AEMO's forecast of another 9 gigawatts of gas peaker plants. We disagree with this result, it says, pointing to plunging costs that mean battery storage is both faster and significantly cheaper than fossil fuel alternatives. End quote. Tesla's not wrong that battery storage is faster and cheaper. The batteries are hard to get at the moment, though. Tesla, of course, is doing more than anybody else on the planet to remedy this imbalance. What is a bunch of crap from the clean peaker application, aside from calling it clean, is that the peaker plant could deliver longer duration storage. I don't believe that's true. I would say it's true that the peaker plant could store fuel to run the plant for longer durations than the battery could run, but this is a cost-benefit analysis. It's not enough just to say that it's a technical advantage. For the amount of money you'll spend over the 20-year lifespan of a gas peaker plant, you could match and I would say definitely exceed the storage duration and ultimately things like power delivery, while massively outperforming the peaker plant on all other metrics, right? It's encouraging to me that this is an inevitability. Batteries are going to outcompete gas peaker plants. This is really just, I don't know, a remnant of the old establishment, and in a decade, I mean, honestly, I don't even think this will be a topic of interest. All right, let's bring up that third story. This one is coming from PV Magazine. They point out that higher solar prices somehow aren't curbing demand. Let's read it full screen. Quote, Bloomberg NEF reports that most of the capacity was solar power added this year. Amazon and Microsoft led the procurements with 38% of the total, and 8.2 gigawatts of that capacity was solar power. All of these record purchases occurred despite steadily increasing prices in the solar industry. End quote. We might chalk some of this up to inflation. If we look through that lens, it's not surprising that demand persists even though prices are rising. The other dynamic is that supply for labor isn't keeping up with demand. I mean, really, this is another inflationary pressure. Even though there are enough panels, in fact, there's maybe a glut of panels, there aren't enough people to install them, and the rise in demand is, pushing up prices as a result. And this is really just another way of stating the effects of inflation. Of course, this is going to be the story of the 2020s. Demand for renewables will increase, prices will increase, but demand will continue to increase as the transition to renewables gains momentum. So this whole thing is something for us to keep an eye on. And that'll do it for the news. Let's take another break. When we come back, we'll talk about production, PTO. So I want to pull up some production numbers. Let's pause for a second, and I'll bring up my application, my app, my Tesla app. So our production has been pretty fabulous. I mean, of course, we're getting into much longer days. We're getting pretty late in the day today, but we did 41, almost 42 kilowatt hours of production today. What are we? Not quite in March. As I'm recording this, this is the last day of February. And beautiful curve today. And you can see we ended up filling up the batteries about halfway through the day. That does mean we ended up sending a little bit back to the grid. If I were staying on top of things, I would have kept that from happening. Sadly, I wasn't on top of things. But right through the middle of the day, even though we're using that electric heating in the basement, you can see that we're producing more than we can use at the time and put in the batteries. It's a pretty strong argument for getting some more batteries. And if we look past back in the last few days, it's largely the same story. We've been getting, tons and tons of sun. We're getting these beautiful curves. Of course, this was the day after the snow here, and solar production was down quite a bit and a lot choppier. But those production numbers are awesome. So let's check out what's going on with the brother-in-law. If we go to his page here, we can see that his production is screaming. Oh, man. For today, it's 0, but you can see yesterday, it's, again, only because we're recording after midnight, but yesterday, he produced almost 60 kilowatt hours of electricity. So he's really, getting pretty high. So because we've rolled into March, we can't see the monthly number for February, but we did end up almost being exactly even. And most of that was because his solar panels were getting covered with snow and he'd be knocked down to basically no production. You can see that here on February 25th, this really low day here in the middle. Basically no production, not because there was no sun, there was plenty of sun, it's because there was snow on his panels and he couldn't generate as a result. All in all, I'd say production's been pretty good. I do love that, of course, the snow sheds right off the roof. Even though this last snow was really wet and turned mostly into ice, there was nothing I had to do to get anything off the roof. Even the ice just came right off the roof. Of course, it was super, super loud. My wife happened to be on the phone. The creative director wife was, holding some kind of meeting. And then all of a sudden, the house is, really loud. Feels like it's shaking. It's kind of crazy, but it's definitely a welcome sound. And I heard the same thing from Kevin Giasulo. I just texted him asking him if the freight train had rolled over his roof yet. It was like, it was a welcome sound. Love that we are producing an amazing amount of electricity, as a result. But we did get a new electricity bill. I haven't reviewed it yet. I need to go ahead and pay that. I wanted to compare that with our last gas bill. I did tell you guys in the last episode that new gas bill was quite high. It was like $400. Gas got really expensive. I was about to say I don't know why. Obviously, we all know why, but it's very interesting to see how the different energy sources change in price so significantly over time. It wasn't but a couple of years ago that gas was considered very inexpensive, especially for heating your home. Like, natural gas was the preferred way. People were, switching out their boilers, trying to get natural gas-fired boilers instead of oil-fired boilers, which we had in our old house. And, frankly, it's a lot better the way it's delivered, too, because you're paying by unit used instead of by tank. So you would get an oil delivery and you'd owe $1,500, $2,000 in a single pop, and that'd be just like, super painful. But the way gas is delivered, it comes, from the street on demand, so they meter it a lot more like electricity. But of course, if I'd been spending electricity, if I'd been using electricity to heat my home, then I probably would have spent a lot more than $400. But still, I'm used to paying like $100 to heat the home in a winter month. So again, just super interesting how, energy prices change so dramatically over time. And that is a massive advantage if you get solar, is that your prices are very predictable. They are not, at the behest or at the whim of political macro forces. You control your destiny, or you have controlled your destiny by investing in the infrastructure to produce electricity for your home. Just something I wanted to mention, I think, this time around. But we'll dig into some of the details in the next episode. I did call the hotline again for solar roofs, and my witness test is still not booked. It's a little bit discouraging. It's been about 2 weeks since I called them last time, and I figured it would at least be booked, and that, you know, maybe the wait time would be another week from now. But yeah, still not booked. So I wanted to find out from them if there was a way that I could guarantee it would be booked by this time, maybe in 2 weeks when I was following up. But they, you know, unfortunately didn't have an answer for me, which is fine. I mean, you know, it's not really up to Tesla to have it booked. It's up to Tesla to request that it be booked. And then, you know, my utility, United Illuminating, has to, you know, schedule it themselves. So anyway, as soon as I find out about that, I'll be spreading the good news, of course. But that'll do it for episode 47 of the Tesla Power Podcast. Please use my referral code. You can save $500 on a solar roof, $300 on solar panels. You can go to ts.la/Aaron62310 to place your order. And I'm Aaron Brady, your residential energy community organizer. Let's do this again on the next video.